happen. We have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard. Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup.
And if you're watching this, World War III hasn't started, and that's a plus. Our guest this week, and we're going to be talking to him shortly, is Irish gay activist Tiernan Brady, who led the successful referenda campaigns for marriage equality, not just in Ireland, but in Australia too.
He's a big hero, and we are very lucky to have him and happy to have him here. On the other hand, our president, Mr. Trump, has issued another religious freedom executive order, further entrenching the power of the religious right against us.
The Republican Senate continues to confirm anti-LGBT judges, although one of them withdrew this week, as the Democrats finally mount a counteroffensive.
While most anti-LGBT legislation has died in state legislatures in the last year or so, Kansas and Oklahoma have just passed bills to allow discrimination against LGBT people by adoption agencies.
And New Hampshire's Republican-led legislature has passed a transgender rights bill, and it looks like the Republican governor is going to sign it.
Remember Roy Moore? How quickly they forget. Defeated horrendous homophobic candidate for Senate from Alabama. Well, now he may run for governor.
There's a new gay male mayor in Texas who was proud to wear high heels.
And not just as cowboy boots.
Right.
Temporary memorial to the victims of the Pulse massacre of 2016 has opened in Orlando, Florida.
In Pakistan, the National Assembly has passed sweeping protections for transgender people amidst a wave of anti-trans murders.
And there's new news about the spread of HIV and the related HTLV1 virus around the world. Not good news.
But
the good news is that we have Tiernan Brady here today.
How are you?
You ran yes equality in Ireland, and the people said yes, and you ran the equality campaign in Australia, and the people said yes. And here you are. What's next?
Oh, I thought you'd tell me. That's what I came for. I came for wisdom.
Oh, we'd like you to.
Well, wait, let's do a little more of an introduction. So Ireland was the first country to pass marriage equality by a public vote. And, you know, everybody was terrified of this. We can't possibly put civil rights to a public vote. How is this going to work? And the viewers of Gay USA know that after a long and tough campaign led by the brilliant Tiernan Brady, the Irish people, by a vote of, I think, 62%, or something like that, passed marriage equality. And then you went to Australia and did the same thing.
Yeah, and got the same result, which was great. 62% again.
Shocking.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's only two countries in the world now passed marriage equality by a public vote, and that's, you know, Ireland and Australia. And, you know, I have to be honest about the Irish one. I think, you know, everybody remembers it and everyone celebrates it. But I think one of the real reasons they celebrated it is most of the world was pretty surprised that Ireland did this first. And, you know, we like to think of ourselves as the home of Intel and Microsoft and, you know, Google and Facebook. But I think most of the world, when they think of Ireland, still thinks of Father Ted episodes and, you know, priests and hills and sheep. You know, and the challenge is both of those generalizations are true.
Yeah.
You know, Ireland is a conservative country. It's a country where family is very important. It's a religious country. It's, you know, got the second highest weekly mass rate attendance in Europe.
You're about to have a public vote on abortion.
Yeah. And
although the church's standing has gone way down over the last decade because of the scandals and things.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things is, whilst the hierarchy of the church have lost so much credibility, people haven't lost their faith. So I think what we knew in Ireland was that, you know, this is a country that has strong religious values, but also, you know, strong conservative values, and a lot of those values, you know, instead of us thinking them as bad values, are actually really good reasons to support equality. So we, start talking to people on the basis of the values they already have. So, if you are practicing Catholic, you believe in respect, you believe in human dignity, you believe that you should treat your neighbour the way you would like to be treated yourself. And how do we as campaigns then start to use those values that people already have? Because I found...
Have you talked to the Pope about this?
He doesn't take my call. And but
Mike.
I think what I found so often is, and we found everywhere, we need to meet people where they are. Look at the values they already celebrate and see, well, how do we allow them to see our lives through those values, rather than starting a conversation with, your values are terrible. Because, if you were sitting at a dinner table and someone said that to you, that's kind of the end of the conversation in your own head. You kind of switch down and go, I'm not listening to the rest of this. But, all too often in campaigning we do that. And, it's like that point always, I don't know anybody in the world who was ever called a homophobe, who clutches their pearls afterwards and goes, well, thank you for telling me how, terrible I am. I'm now going to support you forever. And instead of us going, well, okay, you believe in these values, I think they're great values, they need to apply to us as well.
But we worry about older voters, and they are more conservative, and yet you came up with this Call Your Grandma campaign, or grandparents campaign, which we ran on here, and it was so moving for young people to be calling their grandparents and getting support.
I mean, if anyone has time, they should watch on YouTube. It's so good. And I think one of the things that's really beautiful about that campaign in Ireland, which we translated to Australia into Ring Your Rello, which is ring your relative. Australians just cut everything in half, so they just take a word and cut it in half and add an O at the end. And it's just so, but that campaign came organically from a group of students in Trinity College. And they came over to the campaign and said, we have an idea and we're just going to video ourselves. And we just said, that's a fantastic idea, do it and we'll push it out. And I think so much of the Irish campaign and the Australian campaign was about getting people to realize, actually, you're the campaign in your space. That's a really great idea. Don't come to us to make it, make it. You can do this. And when people started to do this, all these amazing videos of just, grannies and granddads chatting to cameras in the middle of the country, and, parents talking about why they were voting yes, all started to pop up. But that was all organic, and it was, a couple of students who stood up and realized, I can change the space. And the other thing just to say about that one, what's so beautiful is, and it reminds us why it's so important that each of us remembers we're a campaigner in our own space all the time. We know everyone under the age of 40, almost everybody is totally over this issue. LGBTI people should be treated equally. They've grown up knowing them. And for people who are older, a lot of them just haven't had the engagement with LGBTI people. Now, in reality, they have. They just didn't know they were gay.
Right.
And that intergenerational conversation within families became so powerful because, this is my grandson telling me this now, and my granddaughter, and they're telling me it about their friend. And suddenly, marriage equality stopped becoming a conversation about a right. It stopped being a what and became a who. And I always think, when people stop thinking of this as a what and start thinking of it as a who, we have them forever.
And you were able, in this particular modern age, with video, with online campaigns, you were able to multiply that exponentially very quickly.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges always is we had a brilliant digital team in Australia and a great one in Ireland. In fact, one of the guys who worked in Ireland came over to Australia at very short notice. I phoned them at 4 in the morning when they finally announced they were having a public vote, and I literally just said, a guy called Craig Dwyer said, pack, we paid your flight, you're getting over here fast. But I think one of the great things about where social media can trigger empowerment of people, where they realize, I can do this. That's a really light lift. I can create a message. Because I think sometimes we don't see how powerful we are in our own spaces. You're in your space of your family and your friends and your neighbours and your work colleagues, and you're a more powerful ambassador for equality in that space than any national campaign. Because when you deliver the message, when you tell your story, that's what changes the dial. And there's no one that's a greater expert at your story than you. And I think sometimes we just don't see our own power.
And I think a lot of people are scared of speaking up and speaking out and taking that power.
I think it's so central to what we did in the campaign. We realized people were scared to tell their own stories, and people in the middle were scared to ask, because they were worried people don't like getting the words wrong. I'd love to ask Auntie Mary what it's like to be a lesbian, but I could get thrown out before dinner's over if I get the wrong phrase. And LGBTQ, we'll add another letter. We sound like an insurance company instead of a neighbour or a brother or sister. But we've created, for all the barriers we face, we have to acknowledge we've created our own barrier, and people are very worried about engaging with us. And we have to make sure that people understand you don't have to have a PhD in gay to talk to a gay person. You can get the language wrong. What matters is your intent. And as LGBTI people, we have to understand if we don't allow that conversation to happen, somebody who should be a supporter has no place to ask that little question that some conservative has put in their head, some no voter has put in their head. They have nowhere to ask. And then they don't take the final step to being a yes. And I think about all the language. We had a great politician at home who I'm never naming, who used to talk to me about how much he was in favour of BLT equality, and he
Me too.
And he campaigned everywhere across Ireland for sandwiches, and I think that's brilliant. We could go, you've got all that wrong. You need to brush up on your stuff, but the truth of it is we don't need people to be experts. We just need people to support our equality. Yeah. And all too often, sometimes we sound like, you have to be careful, one wrong word and there's no dessert for you. And so we had a duty to get LGBTI people and supporters to understand there's an extra barrier here that we are the only people who can take it down, to allow people to come and ask us the questions, because we should be confident about our answers. They're good answers, and they can stand up to any scrutiny.
Now, of course, we had tons of referenda here in this country on same-sex marriage, brought by the right wing because they wanted to ban it in the constitutions in the 90s, in the mid-90s, when no one had any discussion about it. Although we did finally win one in Minnesota. Beforehand, a big place. But has all of this given you any insight? You follow American life and politics into how we can resolve the impasse that we have here?
I think the challenge for us always is, you have to separate out political change and social change. Political change, there's winners and losers. You got to get in there. You win the election. Everyone else is out until the next election. Social change isn't that. It's a journey. And in the end, it's about persuading people, not defeating them. And that's not to say it will be easy to persuade everybody, but it's an understanding that no matter what happens on each stage of the journey towards LGBTI equality, at each moment we're all going to have to share the same country. So I think social change is about understanding we can't position ourselves on the basis that we have to crush the other side, because most people who were on our side were on the other side 10 years ago. And they've come over because they've engaged, because we've engaged. They move from being no advocates to doubters to being supporters. And I think when you understand that point and that you allow that to frame all of your journey, you realize that the real journey isn't just marriage, it's social harmony. So that we can get to a point where LGBTI people are full and equal in society, but also respected and can participate in society. And that means when it comes to America or Australia and Ireland, how we campaign matters as much as what we campaign for. Because the tone that we set as campaigners, whether it's in our family space or on a national level, everyone else has to live with that tone long after the campaign rolls out of town and everybody's gone. And if that's a negative, angry, divisive campaign, I'm convinced that you can occasionally win. But the problem is, then you shut down shop, and people who are rural and LGBTI, elderly LGBTI, young LGBTI people, they're stuck on their own again, and they're living with a divisive tone that you created. So I think that commitment for us, no matter how hard it is to resist occasionally wanting to go, that's outrageous, I can't believe it. And it is that piece where we think about, here's the world, and here's the 10% who are hard yes, and here's the 10% who are hard no, and 80% of people are mowing their lawns, watching the television, getting on with their lives, And all too often we can end up focusing on this 10% who are the most immovable and having a big old row with them. And we think it's great because we think we're winning the row, but the 80% aren't listening.
Even Tony Abbott's sister engaged with him.
Oh, she's fantastic. Christine Foster, for anyone who doesn't know, Tony Abbott was the Conservative Prime Minister of Australia. And his sister,
but he led the campaign against us.
Led the campaign against it. I was at his sister's wedding to her new wife.
With him?
With him, he turned up. And again,
did you talk to him?
I did. I go out of my way to always. There's no one we shouldn't be able to talk to. I get a Christmas card from the head of the No campaign in Ireland still, and I think that's the way it should be, because we have to share the same space. The day marriage equality happened in Australia, the losers don't have to leave. We're stuck with them, and all too often we were the losers. They were stuck with us. So how do you make sure the next piece of the journey, because it is a journey, continues? And I think that's always about being able to talk to Tony Abbott or to talk to whoever it is.
So maybe you'll get the Nobel Prize instead of Trump, I hope.
Please.
But here's a large issue I want to bring up. You had to vote on this in Ireland because you had to change the Constitution. It required a vote of the people. Yep. But I'm wondering how, if it did get, and we worry about these things getting ugly, what happens to bullying in kids, but in Australia you didn't have to have a vote, and they did. But what was the effect on school kids, on bullying, on all the things that we worried about happening because our rights were being debated?
So there's an up and down answer to this. People should never have to have their rights decided by a public vote. That's the job of parliaments. They get elected. And in Australia that was the same.
And courts.
And courts to defend those rights. And I think, the purpose of the Australian process, it was imagined, dreamt up by Conservatives who wanted to find a way to stop it. Yes. Ironically, it didn't stop it. We got a great result, which is fantastic. But, these processes are really hard because people, forget about activists. People wake up in the middle of the country, and they turn on the television, turn on the radio, open the paper, or worse, turn on their Twitter feed or Facebook, and they're reading this diatribe about them, about their worth in society and how they represent a threat to society. And that's hard, and people have to go through that alone. And in Ireland, America, we're very conscious of that. And again, that was another reason why tone was so important, because we knew people were out there that we would never get to, but who still had to live through this awful process. And the second point is we had to put together as much supports, mental health supports, and work with all the mental health organisations, because we knew that more people were going to engage. We knew from the Irish experience, and it was mirrored in the Australian experience, that was true. It's a terrible way to do it. Now, the only caveat I would say to that is, all too often as minorities, or in the case of women as majorities, we very rarely get to pick our path. What we do get to do is decide how we campaign on it. You get dealt your cards. There's two metaphors. You get dealt your cards, and you don't get to pick them, but you get how to play them. And as crummy as a process as that was, we had a duty to go, well, this is the one we've been given. So let's get suited up and let's give it everything. And the one thing I would say about a public vote, and it's no reason to ever have one, is it's high risk, but it's huge high return, because you empower, you create visibility that no piece of legislation or no Supreme Court ruling can ever do. I mean, people in small villages and towns across Australia standing up and saying, here I am, and changing those communities forever. Like the most beautiful stories, just rolled into the campaign all the time of, people who were standing up for the postman, a town of 300 people, but he was their postman.
And before you get away, I do want to hear, how did you come to be the person who not only did Ireland, but I know you were involved in politics, you're a former mayor in Ireland, but how did you come to be this person who led this?
Oh, by accident. Yeah, I was mayor of my hometown, and I'd given it up, and I moved back up to Dublin, and I met the national organisation, Gay Lesbian Equality Organisation, for a cup of coffee to talk about a few things, and they were talking about civil partnerships, and 4 coffees later I was helping them with the politics of that. Civil partnership passed, which was brilliant. Controversial, again, within our own community.
Yes.
But we knew we had to have a public vote in Ireland, and our organisation took the specific position, which wasn't universally popular, that if you want to win a public vote, you got to make the question as small as possible. And to do that, you need to get so many things out of the way. So pensions, healthcare, adoption, civil union status. And in a way, then when you get to the marriage campaign itself, well, the country has already decided on the principle by giving you civil unions. Now it's about the word. And that went on. I became the political director with, a great campaign team, Brian Sheehan and Grania Healy, there's the co-directors, and that was great and it was successful. And I thought that was the end of my gay stuff. I was going back to do something else. And a man who became an MP since came over to us from Australia to America, met the American organisation, said, I'm going to Ireland to find out about what we should do. And he came after talking to the organisations here, and we had dinner. And it was very nice and blah, blah, blah. I sure Irish people in dinner, we could chat all day, no problem to us.
You're telling me.
Yeah, I know. And I thought that was the end of that. Lovely conversation. And 2 weeks later, they invited me out to give a few speeches. And while I was there, they said, will you take over the role as director of the campaign? And
sneaky, those Australians.
I tell you what. Yeah, they were luring me away from January Dublin to January in Sydney. It was just wicked of them, and I went home and packed a bag. I don't think you could say no,
no.
And they were really great people, but they were facing a campaign on a country the size of America.
It was very scary.
Gigantic.
Everybody thought it was going to be a disaster, and you pulled it off with.
Well,
the principle, don't call people deplorables.
Yes.
Now, you're going to be at the Irish consulate on Friday at what time?
This Friday.
Brendan?
Friday.
Yes.
Friday
what
at
time
5:30?
on Friday?
Friday at 5:30, isn't it? This is our secret brilliant producer, Brendan.
Happy 60th birthday, Brendan. We'll put the information.
Oh, man.
We'll put the information in our email.
Thanks very much.
Would you like me to strangle him now? All right. Thank you.
Oh, look, no problem. It's a pleasure.
Lovely to meet you. We'll see you on Friday at the Irish consulate in New York.
See you on Friday. Thanks.
Congratulations on all your
invited.
victories.
Thanks for having us.
We will continue to follow your work.
That forum that Tiernan Brady is speaking at the Irish consulate is at 5:30, and I'll put all the information in our email, GayUSA. Go to gayusatv.org to sign up for our emails, and you can get all the registration information.
He's really terrific.
Yeah,
and
I could have talked to him for an hour.
The job he did in Ireland and Australia is just magnificent. So now we turn to our woebegone country.
Well, I have a correction from last week. I said that Paul Ryan fired the Senate chaplain. It was, of course, the House chaplain, and he's back because of religious freedom.
Because everyone's scared of the Catholics?
Well,
we'll get to more of that in entertainment news.
Well, Trump did sign his religious freedom order, a new religious freedom order. It directs the Department of the Treasury not to take action against religious organizations that speak out on political issues consistent with law, not ordinarily been treated as participation and intervention in a political campaign on behalf of a candidate. So it's a little vague. There's a picture of them all doing it. All you have to know is that it made Tony Perkins of the Family Research Council and Franklin Graham very happy.
I would say all you have to know is that you can discriminate against LGBT people or anyone else you want and still get federal funding.
That's the worst part of this.
You would think that public funds, your tax dollars, my tax dollars, his tax dollars, would not go to organizations that discriminate against us. You would be wrong.
And as I say, we have a problem with this even in liberal cities like New York, where right-wing religious organizations get a lot of money. And they sign something that says they won't discriminate, but then they do. So it's up to you to complain.
Yeah.
All right.
So that was the White House Faith and Opportunity Initiative. Now, also, where do I want to go to next? Oh, also at the White House, on a better point, Trump was forced to give an award to the Teacher of the Year, Mandy Manning from Spokane, Washington.
There she is, and her chest is festooned with buttons.
Including trans pride buttons and other women's march buttons. Mandy teaches refugee teens in Spokane, Washington.
Joel Ferris High School.
And she brought a lot of letters from those refugee teens to Trump. She also wanted to speak about the refugee teens, but she was not allowed to do so in the White House, even though she is the Teacher of the Year.
She hoped that he would read them, but that's asking an awful lot.
Yeah.
Since he doesn't read his security briefings, and that's why he got rid of the Iran deal.
And perhaps one of the things she would have wanted to talk to him about was that in Florida, the ICE people, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement people, grabbed an LGBT African American for deportation who was born in Pennsylvania.
Well, Trump also led the National Day of Prayer this week, and I'd be praying too if I had your record of corruption.
Are we following Tiernan Brady's admonition to be nice to people?
To Trump? That's asking an awful lot.
Well, maybe we shouldn't be focusing on him. So instead, let's focus on Pence, who swore in our new ambassador to Germany, Rick Grenell, there on the left, whose partner... Are they married?
Well, that's the thing.
Husband?
They keep referring to Mike Lashley as his partner. Are they living in sin?
I don't know, but
maybe Mike Pence prefers that they not corrupt the institution of marriage.
Is it Lashy or Lachey? Have you heard it pronounced?
Oh, I haven't heard it pronounced.
I don't know. At any rate, he was. I wanted to talk about him giving the evil eye to Pence. Can we get that picture back up there?
Picture back.
And Pence, when he introduced this whole ceremony, made a reference to Grenell's partner, but then never referred to him, even when he was standing there holding the family Bible and never...
Holding the Bible.
Yeah.
Grenell describes himself as a gay conservative Christian. Looking on at the ceremony were Ivanka and Kellyanne and Suzanne Summers.
who Pence was quite effusive in referring to as a longtime friend.
So Grenell has been a spokesperson for 4 UN ambassadors, including the warmonger John Bolton, who's in the national security position now and is about to start World War III. But he immediately called on Germany to stop trading with Iran. And the Germans felt, this is not what a diplomat is supposed to say.
Yeah, and then Grenell said, I'm only using the language that was on the statements from the White House. I don't know why you're angry at me for being such a son of a gun in Germany on my first day in office.
Can you, now in the spirit of Tiernan Brady, can you stand a positive story about Mr. Trump? The Department of Defense, while fighting trans service continuously, and we've learned more about how Mattis was involved in trumping up this document against it, but they've launched a training program for child care professionals at military-affiliated child care and youth programs on creating gender-safe spaces to better understand gender-expansive or LGBTQ children and youth in our Defense Department.
Well, when I hear a story like that, my first thought is, wait till they figure out what's going on, then they'll stop it.
Oh, well.
We'll see.
We'll see.
I have another piece of sort of backhanded good news from Washington, D.C. We told you last week, I think, or maybe the week before, that there was going to be a freedom march held by those advocating conversion therapy, the freedom being freedom from homosexuality. The right-wing groups were advertising this. And guess how many people showed up?
It looked like about 40.
36. 36 people at the Freedom March.
Well.
And how many of them were employees of those groups?
All right. On the judicial front, one piece of good news, this guy Damian Schiff has withdrawn his nomination. He's the one who called Anthony Kennedy a judicial prostitute and refused to answer questions about his personal beliefs about gay rights. But the Senate is moving Michael Brennan into the 7th Circuit over the objections of Tammy Baldwin, who's the home state senator. This is breaking the tradition of the blue slip. He worked for Governor Scott Walker, extremist. I could go on and on how terrible these people are. He once said, how sad the lives of degenerate drug users and queers are valued more than the innocent victims of more prevalent ailments when he's talking about AIDS. This is the kind of person they're putting on the court.
Well, it does drive me crazy that every day, all day long, what we hear on MSNBC and other cable news networks and wherever in the news is endless discussion of the Mueller investigation and Cohen and all of this, all of which should be covered. But please, there are real-world consequences to this administration, and these judicial appointments are very, very serious business.
And I have to say, I'm sick of getting liberal notices about how awful these judges are. And I write them back and I say, are you doing anything to organize in any of the states where you might be able to pick up a Republican vote to stop these things? No answer. So
I don't think you can pick up a Republican vote.
If you do enough of a campaign in a district, in a state rather, where there's a senator who is a little worried about their Republican senator who's a little worried about re-election, you might be able to.
Well, I certainly think you ought to be campaigning against the people who are voting for these judicial nominees.
That's the only alternative is to remove them, but you might be able to move some votes on the more extreme ones. We used to be able to do this. All right,
but it's a different time now.
So the Democrats have a new group called Demand Justice to counteract the right-wing groups that, they're the ones who push people stopping Merrick Garland. They had this multi-million-dollar campaign. We were sitting on our hands practically, just saying, don't do that, it's not nice. Well, so they've got something serious that's raising $10 million to try to counteract that, which is what you have to.
$10 million bucks?
Well, that's
better than nothing.
Yes.
All right. Can we move to the states?
What is security? No. Oh, yeah, we can. I'm looking it over there. Yes, let's move on.
Good news from New Hampshire, which did pass the statewide gender identity and expression non-discrimination bill. The governor is expected to sign it.
Yes, Governor Sununu.
Yes.
Chris Sununu. There are many Sununus in New Hampshire.
Republicans.
Yes, they are.
But meanwhile, Massachusetts has a Gender Identity and Expression Non-Discrimination Act, but the right wing has succeeded in getting a proposed ballot initiative on the ballot for November. So as New Hampshire is moving forward by passing it, Massachusetts faces a possible repeal at the ballot box in November. So that is the next fight.
They're calling it freedom for all Massachusetts. But the bad news comes from Kansas and Oklahoma.
Yes.
In Kansas, Governor Jeff Collier will sign this bill that allows adoption agencies to discriminate against gay couples and foster care agencies.
The legislative debate included a Republican representative in Kansas when it was pointed out to him that this would allow discrimination against same-sex couples in adoption and foster care. His quote is, I know, that's true, but, a little discrimination is okay.
Well, it's tricky because it does not apply to agencies that contract directly with the Department of Children and Families, but it discriminates against agencies. The agencies can get state reimbursement if they make a placement on behalf of contractors. So effectively, they're allowed to do it.
Also in Oklahoma, where Governor Mary Fallin will sign their religious freedom in adoption and foster care bill. So this will add Oklahoma and Kansas to Alabama, Michigan, South Dakota, Virginia, and Texas as states that allow this so-called religious freedom. Now, meanwhile...
And by the way, it's the Catholic Conference in those states that mainly push for this.
And it's the Catholic Conference in New York that is still lobbying against the bill that would expand the statute of limitations on prosecuting priests who have committed sexual abuse.
And they couldn't stop the Assembly in New York from passing Gender, which is the transgender rights bill, but it stalled in the Senate. It passed 96 to 43, which is up from the last vote, which was 92 to 48. But we got to get a vote in the Senate, folks, in New York.
Which we have failed to do year after year after year.
Can't even get a vote.
I have no reason to believe that's going to change, although Cuomo may put a little more juice behind it.
Maybe the new Attorney General, Barbara Underwood, you might have heard about a little kerfuffle in New York where we lost our Attorney General. It was very pro-gay, very quote-unquote pro-woman.
Only the latest statewide official we have lost in the last few years through corruption or abuse.
Yes.
Meanwhile, I just want to...
Or visiting prostitutes in the case of Governor Spitzer.
Yes. What have we lost? 3 or 4 or 5 statewide officials, not to mention members of the Senate and Assembly?
It is the group with the highest crime rate.
Before we fully leave Kansas and Oklahoma, I will also point out that in both those states, they have very high rates of foster kids who have been lost in the system,
killed,
abused, and
dead.
killed. Yes.
It's horrendous.
Yes.
Absolutely
So the
horrendous.
idea that they are eliminating potential foster parents or adoptive parents is criminal.
In Illinois, the Senate passed an LGBTQ inclusive school curricula. It's going to include LGBTQ history, people. It's good.
It's great. You know, California's been the only place that has this. They're talking about it in Massachusetts too. And this really is something that is fundamentally important across the board, and every state should have this mandate to include us in the curriculum from the very beginning. But they're having a problem with it in Oregon, where they have an annual event called the Oregon Battle of the Books, Oh Bob. And kids in elementary, middle, and high schools get an assigned reading list of, I think, 16 books, or maybe it's 16 kids and a number of books in teams. And so they read the books, and then they have these contests of reading comprehension and trivia and stuff around the books. Well, one of the books on the elementary school reading list is a book called George, about a trans kid. And some of the parents got up in arms about this and said it was inappropriate for elementary school kids. And 2 school districts have pulled out of this very popular statewide contest.
I think we need to send the Department of Defense in there to educate them.
Okay.
Call in the National Guard.
Well, maybe they should do what's happening in Atlanta, Georgia, where the new mayor has fulfilled a campaign promise by naming an LGBTQ affairs coordinator and appointing an LGBTQ issues advisory board.
And speaking of schools, in Texas, the lesbian teacher who was placed on leave in Mansfield, Texas, Stacey Bailey, is now, even though they renewed her contract, they're not letting her teach. She's suing for discrimination. She's suing under the Equal Protection Clause. They won't let her teach.
They had a very moving ceremony in Orlando, Florida this week. They dedicated an interim Pulse memorial at the site of the Pulse nightclub where 49 people were massacred.
I've been down there, and they're trying to make it a place of contemplation. And they do have larger plans, but they're going to take a long time. The One Pulse Foundation is the one coordinating all this and are making plans for the future.
Meanwhile, in Detroit, Michigan, a man was convicted of shooting and robbing a trans woman. Good that they got a conviction.
In Alabama, Roy Moore says he may run for governor someday. The current governor, Kay Ivey, is not running.
Really? Why not?
I don't know the reason.
Okay.
She replaced the guy who was thrown out for having the affair.
Right, exactly. And
forgotten in history.
Let's get back to the judicial news with Judge Mike Jacobs in Georgia. He has come, we have a picture of him, he has come out as bisexual. He is a former Republican state representative. He's married with 3 kids. Usually when people come out as bisexual, it's because they're in a same-sex relationship. But he is married to a woman.
He wants to be a role model,
yeah.
He says. There are 2
thank you, Mike.
There are 2 openly LGBT judges in Fulton County. He's in DeKalb.
And the new mayor of Del Rio, Texas, a border town, is Bruno Ralphie Lozano, who has become famous as saying he likes to wear high heels.
Well, he has. It's a town of 40,000.
Yeah.
He's 35 years old. He's also the youngest mayor ever. And he's against Trump. He says, we don't want this war zone going on. It's beautiful down here.
It's a border town, and he is defending the border against the idea of building a wall.
There are 52 out LGBT candidates in Texas this year.
And he's been elected.
And he has. And let's talk a little bit about the elections. In Indiana, Mike Pence's older brother, Greg, won the Republican primary for Mike's old seat in out of Columbus, Indiana. He's a bankrupt businessman. So, politics.
And the the guy who ran the Consumer Protection Board in Washington,
Cordray.
Yes, got nominated for governor of Ohio.
Yes.
Beating Dennis Kucinich in the primary.
The worst Republican lost in West Virginia, Don Blankenship.
Too bad.
Yeah, it's too bad for us because he's running against Joe Manchin.
In New Hope, Texas, there was an incumbent trans woman mayor, Jess Herbst. She was defeated by the widow of her predecessor. So no longer a trans mayor in New Hope, Texas.
By the way, this woman I mentioned is the new Attorney General of New York, Barbara Underwood. She used to be a clerk for Thurgood Marshall.
Really?
Yes, so that's
good.
Yeah,
she's 73.
Yes, she is, I was going to say.
Yeah.
Some people say bring back Liz Holtzman. She's 76, but it's very important who the Attorney General of New York is because there are 100 lawsuits pending against Trump from the AG's office in New York, and they're also investigating the Trump crime family on a number of fronts.
And they're also investigating the Manhattan District Attorney for failing to prosecute Harvey Weinstein.
Our old friend Cy Vance.
Yeah.
All right.
News from the United Methodist Church. The United Methodist Church has written doctrine that says being homosexual is inappropriate and disorderly.
Incompatible with church teaching.
But they've been debating this for some time, and they're going to vote on their new policy, and the bishops of the United Methodist Church are going to offer 3 different possible plans, but they're recommending
yes.
the one church plan, which is the most progressive of the plans
yes.
being offered, that would allow local option for performing same-sex marriages and ordaining LGBT people.
They're going to vote on all this at their a special session of their general conference in February.
Terrible story from Houston, Texas, where a gay couple, Ben and Renee Ruiz, Ben, 52 years old, killed his husband, Renee, 62 years old, and himself. Ben on the left is the one who murdered his husband, Renee, on the right. They were pillars of Houston society. They'd been together for over 20 years. They were in the midst of a divorce, and this is just really a shock to the community in Houston.
Horrendous. And the Boy Scouts are busting up. The Mormon Church broke all ties. They constitute 20% of scouting, and they have now broken all ties. The Boy Scouts are also changing their name to Boy Scouts BSA and admitting girls, to the consternation of the Girl Scouts.
When people say they're changing their name and they become, the Scouts BSA, BSA is Boy Scouts of America. I think it's a little disingenuous.
Well, it's like RCA. It doesn't stand for anything.
Yeah, yes, it does.
Not anymore.
Amazon Smile, which is their charity arm, where they allow you to devote some portion of your purchase price to a charitable organization, has eliminated the Alliance Defending Freedom as an eligible charity because they are on the Southern Poverty Law Center's hate group list.
And I don't know why the Mormons are pulling out of the Boy Scouts, mostly over gay stuff and things. The support for same-sex marriage is up to 40% from 27% in 2014. 18 to 29-year-olds, 69% support anti-discrimination laws. Muslims favor no, this is Mormons. That's Mormon data.
Among Mormons.
Mormons. Muslim data. Muslims favor same-sex marriage by 51%, with 34% opposed. The only group still mainly opposing us are white evangelicals, and they're running the country right now.
Yeah.
63% of you overall support same-sex marriage.
In California, the state has filed a lawsuit against Crunch Fitness in El Cajon because they kept a trans woman out of the women's locker room. She was very discreet, never naked in front of the other women, took a separate dressing area, but they didn't want to let her in there, so the state is suing them.
We are in New York trying to inject the spirit of Stonewall into the Pride March, and we had a resistance meeting presided over by Ann Northrup.
Among others,
the other day, and you know, we're trying to present these things so that we can have a unified resistance movement. And there is going to be another meeting this Saturday at 1:30 p.m. at the LGBT Center in New York. I mean, all Pride marches should be radicalized to some extent. Yes,
Freeform.
yes.
Let the people march in the streets. This group wants to make people wear wristbands so they can keep people in or out.
We'd like to get rid of a lot of the police barriers, which are a great hindrance to participation in the march, a great hindrance to people with disabilities participating in the march.
So,
and for you jumping in if you see something you like, which is how I got involved in '74.
This Saturday, 1:30 p.m., LGBT Center, 208 West 13th Street. Let's move on.
Yes, international?
Yes. In Cuba, they're rewriting the Constitution this summer, and there are rumors that they're going to try to do marriage equality in the new Constitution. Mariela Castro, who is a controversial figure on LGBT rights, is presumably going to lobby for this. We'll see what happens.
Costa Rica's new government took office this week, and the pro-same-sex marriage president, Carlos Alvarado, was sworn in, but also the first out gay member of the National Assembly, leftist Enrique Sanchez. We have a picture of him. He's a journalist. By the way, the rate of domestic violence is soaring there, and but they also have a new vice president there who was the first woman of African descent to serve as vice president on the continent.
In Pakistan, the National Assembly, going along with the Senate there, has passed a transgender rights bill.
It's really far-reaching.
Very comprehensive.
Covers everything.
We'll see whether that means anything to the population. The violence rate against trans women is still quite high.
Well,
and
wait a minute.
Another one was shot dead.
They said the 57th trans woman was killed
since 2015.
All right, May 4th.
For this year.
I mean, shot for not being able to make change at a wedding where she was dancing.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the reason that this person was killed.
Happens here too.
In Khyber Pakhtunkhwa.
In Italy, the government has agreed to recognize two mothers of a son born from artificial insemination to one of them. They're the moms with the son. The one on the right is I think it's the one on the right, is a counselor in the city of Turin.
In Ontario, Canada, they issued their first birth certificate with an X marker on it for gender. It was a petition from a filmmaker named Joshua Ferguson who sought non-binary birth certificate.
And in Northern Ireland, a 17-year-old boy attacked a lesbian, 38, with a cordless drill to her head.
Gravely injured her, and the police suspect it was a homophobic attack. Speaking of homophobia, in Australia, rugby star Israel Folau was called out for sharing a preacher's homophobic sermon that says we're living in a time of sexual perversion beyond description. He says he did it out of love. I'm just warning people of eternal punishment if they continue their sinful ways.
Thanks. Thank you for the warning.
All right.
AIDS news. Well, thank you to Mayor de Blasio of New York City, who has decided to support the safer consumption spaces for drug use.
The openly gay speaker, Corey Johnson, was very much behind this and supporting this.
We've had needle exchange for years, but this is an actual physical space where people can use drugs. It's not that anyone is trying to support this kind of drug use, but it keeps people from overdosing and dying, and it gives you access to them to reach out to them for treatment.
Yeah, but Brian Williams did talk about this on MSNBC to denigrate it as how far we've sunk as a society. I was just appalled. How about learning about harm reduction, Brian, before you condemn things?
Yeah. All right. And some bad stories this week about HIV increasing exponentially in Venezuela because they've run out of drugs there and there's just nothing going on for treatment or prevention.
There's an indigenous group of 200 people where 40% of them have AIDS. have died of AIDS
in
already.
Venezuela.
Yeah, in Venezuela.
And there's also news about the spread of the related HTLV-1 virus, which is a leukemia virus.
Yep.
Not quite as lethal, but certainly scary in Australia.
40% of people in remote regions of Central Australia. It's also hitting Japan, the Caribbean, and parts of Latin America. It transmits pretty much the same way that HIV does. It progresses differently. Sadly, Robert Gallo is in charge of tracking this, and he says, "Oh, you know, it's off the charts. Nobody's done anything." Well, do something.
Also, heartbreaking stories of the breakdown of drug delivery in African countries as the system gets corrupt and drugs disappear.
Well, and the horror of drugs in America. If you watch 60 Minutes this weekend, where they raised the price of a drug for babies from $33 a bottle to $40,000 a bottle, $40,000, and there it is, and we don't do anything about it. But in Savannah, they opened up an LGBTQ medical clinic called Starlin Family Practice, and that's progress. They want more services outside the big cities.
All right, let's move on to entertainment news.
Hey, tune in to Live from Lincoln Center on Friday, May 11th on PBS. Out-Broadway star Andrew Rannells is going to be in concert. You've seen him in The Book of Mormon, Hamilton, Falsettos, and HBO's Girls. Check your local listings, 9 o'clock on WNET in New York.
Well, some of you may have been watching the Metropolitan Museum Costume Institute Gala on the E! Network, familiarly known as the Met Ball. And as everyone was oohing and eyeing over the fashions, along comes Lena Waithe, our heroine from the creator of The Chi, and the first African-American woman to win an Emmy for writing on the sitcom series last year, and gave a brilliant speech at the Emmys about the LGBT community.
So the theme of the show, and the show that's there at the Met, is Heavenly Bodies, which is ecclesiastical garb for most part.
Well, it's Heavenly Bodies, Fashion, and the Catholic Imagination. Anna Wintour and Donatella Versace went to the Vatican to talk to the Pope.
Borrowed some hats.
To get his blessing of doing a Catholic-themed show at the Met.
I shan't be going.
So everybody was wearing dresses with crosses and miters and jewels and all this stuff. And Lena Waithe shows up in that Carolina Herrera designed outfit with the cape. When she spoke at the Emmys, she talked about us being superheroes. So she shows up with an actual cape.
And when she spoke here, she said, "I'm repping my community."
And she added, we may want to go back to the picture again, the black and brown stripes that were added by activists in Philadelphia last year to make a statement of more inclusion in the flag, and that may catch on as a popular new version of the flag. So what she was doing, and she said not only that she was repping the community, but that she was reinterpreting this religious theme as everybody able to be themselves. But it really was a protest against the sins of the Catholic Church, against
They don't like rainbow flags.
No, they do not. So it was wonderful to see her do that. And shameful that the Metropolitan Museum and all these celebrities show up, celebrating the Catholic Church.
Right. They're
really
not nice to us.
Unbelievable. Not nice to us or to a lot of other people.
But I am going to be nice, praise of 217 boxes of Dr. Henry Anonymous. Sounds like a convoluted title for a play about the gay psychiatrist who testified behind a mask in 1972, told through three people who knew him, an early gay advocate, his secretary, pictured there, and his father. It's just running until May 11th there, and it is written by Ayn Gordon and directed by him. It was a very moving show, and I learned a lot about the whole era that I didn't know. It's there at the Baryshnikov Arts Center of the Jerome Robbins Theater. The 217 boxes of Dr. Henry Anonymous, highly recommended.
I have a couple of reality competition show updates. Well, you know, I've been following American Idol with first the drag queen performer who got eliminated last week, and the remaining lesbian, Journey, who's quite a wonderful singer. They were down to 7 contestants this week, and we're eliminating 2. They're doing sort of a speed round American Idol where they're knocking off a lot of people and doing the whole season in about 6 weeks. You know, quick on the audition rounds, quick on the finalists. So it's hairy, and they do the voting right as the show is live and announce the results right at the end instead of doing 2 shows a week with a results show after a performance show. So the theme was Prince. Everybody sang 2 songs, one Prince song and one song that was popular in the year they were born. And Journey led it off with Prince's Kiss, which she did very well on. I wasn't so crazy about her second performance, but none of it was so, you know, spectacular, and so she was eliminated. So we have lost both the drag and the lesbian contestant. We're down to 5, predictably homogenous on American Idol, but I have a new favorite who is a young woman named Maddie Poppy from Iowa. But she did the greatest job on Nothing Compares to You, Prince's song made popular by Sinead O'Connor.
Do we get to see the Eurovision Song Contest here?
I'm not sure we do.
Well, they've got
check that out.
They've got a bunch of gay anthems in
Yes,
there,
they do.
including Ireland's entry from Ryan O'Shaughnessy called Together. I watched a little bit of it online. I'm afraid to show it to you here because I don't want to get knocked off the air with rights. But it's and the Russians are so upset about it. It's about a failed male-male relationship.
Yes.
And the Russians are threatening to block the telecast if it's performed.
They freak out every year about this stuff now. Happy news, Adam Rippon is doing brilliantly on Dancing with the Stars for the 2nd week. They're also racing through a season, eliminating 2 couples a week, but he again tied for the highest vote total, and he's being very cheeky on the show. And
well, he's always very cheeky.
Yeah, well, he's getting away with it on Dancing with the Stars. And I also saw a movie that is opening this weekend, Boom for Real, the late teenage years of Jean-Michel Basquiat.
How was it?
It was pretty good. It was interesting.
Documentary
yes,
or
documentary,
drama?
And a lot of interviews with his friends and colleagues, a lot about the art world and music world in New York in the 70s and 80s. I found it compelling, although I found it really compelling to learn that he grew up in a little more middle-class atmosphere than I suspected. He went to St. Anne's in Brooklyn, which is a very Tony private school. But he was a wonderful artist who died way too young, and it's a pretty compelling movie. So, there you are. So that's it for us this week.
Yep, I'll be back next week with a review of a play about Tennessee Williams and William Inge.
With a guest who's a gay activist in Lebanon and around the Middle East.
His
so
name
that
is
should be
George Azzi, A-Z-Z-I.
We will see you then. Thank you for watching Gay USA.
Bye-bye.